The city of Austin, Texas, had always been a place of opportunities and fresh starts. It was known for its booming tech scene, its vibrant music culture, and the endless possibilities for those willing to take risks. Max Bennett, a 32-year-old project manager, had moved to Austin 2 years ago to escape the fast-paced life in New York. After years of living in a city that never slept, Max had grown tired of the hustle and longed for something different. Austin offered him just that, a new beginning, far from the memories that still haunted him. Max had been with Emily for nearly 5 years. They met at a tech conference in San Francisco, where they instantly hit it off. Their relationship blossomed quickly, filled with late-night conversations, shared ambitions, and the promise of a future together. When Max accepted a job offer in Austin, Emily had moved with him, and they settled into a small yet cozy apartment in a neighborhood filled with trendy coffee shops and boutique stores. It was supposed to be the next step in their perfect life. But life, as Max would soon learn, had a way of shattering even the most solid foundations. It all started with the long hours at work. Max had always been passionate about his job, and the team he led at the tech startup was one of the best in the city. The projects were demanding, the deadlines tight, but Max loved the challenge. Emily, on the other hand, had recently started her own marketing agency, which was slowly but steadily growing. They supported each other's ambitions, but the balance of their relationship began to shift. Max's work consumed most of his time, leaving Emily to manage their personal life. The cracks began to show when Max started working late almost every night, burying himself in his projects. Emily had always been understanding, but it wasn't long before she began pulling away. Max didn't notice it at first, was too consumed by his work. But then, one evening, while preparing for an important client presentation, he came home to an empty apartment. New dinner, new note, just silence. He tried texting and calling, but there was no response. He thought maybe she was working late too. After all, her agency had just landed a big client. But when she finally returned, hours later, the look in her eyes told a different story. She had changed, and he had missed the signs. That night, Emily confessed something that would shatter Max's world forever. She had been seeing someone else. It wasn't a one-time thing either. They had been involved for months. The words were a blur, but the meaning was clear. Their relationship, the life they had built together, was a lie. Max's heart sank as he struggled to process the truth. How had he missed it? How had he been so blind? The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions for Max. He confronted Emily, demanding answers, but the truth was too painful to fully comprehend. She apologized, said she was sorry, but the damage was done. She had betrayed him, and in the process, she had stolen their future. The trust they had built over the years was gone, replaced by the cold reality of her affair. Max didn't know what to do. He felt like he was drowning in the aftermath of it all. The apartment, once their sanctuary, now felt like a prison. His work, which had once been his refuge, now seemed meaningless. Every corner of Austin reminded him of Emily, of their shared dreams, of the life he thought they would have together. It took Max a few weeks before he could gather the strength to leave. He moved into a small, run-down apartment in the heart of the city, far from their old neighborhood. It was the perfect place for him to disappear for a while, to lick his wounds and figure out what came next. The first few days in the new apartment were the hardest. Max had no idea what he was doing, but he knew one thing. He couldn't stay in that old life. He couldn't stay in the place that reminded him of Emily, of their failed future. Austin, however, was a city of reinvention. People came here to start fresh, to turn the page on their pasts, and Max was no exception. He had no family here, no close friends, just his old work acquaintances who still reached out to make sure he was okay. But Max couldn't rely on anyone to fix him. He had to fix himself. He started small long walks around the city, finding solace in the vibrant culture around him. He spent time in local coffee shops, meeting new people, and getting to know the city in a way he never had before. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The more he explored, the more he realized that his pain didn't define him. His past didn't have to determine his future. But there was still a hole inside him, one that he wasn't sure how to fill. The betrayal lingered, haunting him during quiet moments. Max had been a man who believed in love, in loyalty, in the future. And now none of that seemed real. He didn't know who he was anymore, or what kind of man he wanted to become. One evening, as Max was sitting in a local bar, nursing a drink after a long day, he met someone new. Her name was Sophie. She was sitting alone at the bar, her eyes scanning the room, her face calm but thoughtful. Max noticed her instantly, not because she was striking, but because she seemed so at ease in her own skin. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in months. Sophie had just moved to Austin as well, a recent college graduate who had come to the city to chase her own dreams. They struck up a conversation, and it wasn't long before Max realized that Sophie wasn't just a distraction. She was different. There was something about her energy, her positivity, that made him feel alive again. For the first time in what felt like forever, he laughed, he smiled, and he felt normal. They started seeing each other casually over the next few weeks. It was nothing serious, Max wasn't ready for that, but Sophie offered him something valuable. Perspective. She had her own baggage, her own scars, but she didn't let them define her. And slowly, Max began to see that maybe he didn't have to be defined by his past either. One night, while walking along Lady Bird Lake, Max stopped and looked at Sophie. The city lights reflected off the water, creating a shimmering path that seemed to stretch endlessly into the future. "You know," Max said, "I've been stuck in this place, like frozen in time. I thought I couldn't move forward after everything that happened." Sophie smiled, a gentle, understanding smile. "You've got to give yourself time, Max. Healing isn't linear. But you're here, aren't you? You're living." Max nodded, the weight in his chest lightening just a little. "Yeah, I am." And in that moment, he realized something profound. He wasn't living in the past anymore. He was living in the present, building something new, something real. The betrayal had been painful, but it had also been a catalyst for change. It had pushed him to rediscover who he was, to take risks, and to move forward with his life. Austin had become his canvas, and he was ready to paint it however he saw fit. The future was no longer a source of fear, it was a realm of endless possibility. Max had always been someone who thrived on structure, on knowing what the next step was and having a clear plan to get there. But since he had moved to Austin, everything had been different. The first few weeks in his new apartment had felt like a blur of uncertainty. He woke up each day unsure of what to do with his time, and even more unsure of where his life was going. But slowly, he began to find a rhythm in the chaos. Sophie had been a catalyst in his healing, not because she was trying to fix him, but because she simply existed in a way that made him want to be better. She didn't ask for anything from him, didn't need him to be anything other than who he was. Their time together was easy, and for the first time in a long while, Max found himself laughing again. Truly laughing without the heavy burden of grief hanging over him. Max had agreed to meet Sophie at a local bar after work one Friday evening. It had become a small tradition for the two of them. They didn't have grand plans. They simply enjoyed each other's company, and sometimes that was enough. As Max walked through the door of the bar, he immediately spotted Sophie at the counter, her back to him as she chatted with the bartender. There was something about the way she carried herself. Sophie had a quiet confidence that Max admired. She wasn't loud, wasn't trying to grab attention. Instead, she was present, fully engaged in the moment. Her laughter warm and genuine. "Hey," Max greeted as he slid into the seat next to her. Sophie turned and smiled. "Hey, you made it." She raised her glass in his direction. "Drinks on me tonight?" Max chuckled and shook his head. "I think I owe you a few after all those times you let me vent." Sophie grinned, her eyes sparkling in the dim light. "No need to keep count. I'm just happy you're here." Max felt a warmth spread through him at her words. He hadn't realized how much he needed this, how much he needed to let go of the past and just be. The last few months had been a blur of emotional upheaval, and here, sitting beside Sophie, he realized that he was slowly becoming someone new, a better version of himself. They spent the rest of the evening talking, laughing, and sharing stories about their pasts. Sophie talked about her own struggle show. She had moved to Austin to start fresh after a tough breakup of her own. It was a relief to talk to someone who understood the challenges of rebuilding after a relationship had fallen apart. Their shared experiences brought them closer, and Max found himself appreciating the connection they had more and more. As the night wore on, Sophie leaned in slightly, her voice quiet but sincere. "Max, I'm really glad we met. I know we're not rushing into anything, but I can't help feeling like we've got something good here. I've enjoyed these little moments with you, and I just wanted to tell you that." Max's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't expecting this, wasn't sure if he was ready to open himself up to someone again. But hearing Sophie's words, seeing the honesty in her eyes, he felt something stir inside him. He wasn't entirely sure where this was going, but maybe, just maybe, he was ready to explore it. "I'm glad we met too," he replied, his voice steady but thoughtful. "I've been hesitant to jump into anything, you know? But with you, it feels different. I feel like I can just be myself." Sophie smiled, her fingers brushing lightly against his. It was a simple gesture, but it sent a wave of warmth through Max's chest. He hadn't felt this kind of connection in such a long time, and despite the hesitation that still lingered from his past, he couldn't deny the pull he felt towards Sophie. Over the next few weeks, Max and Sophie continued to spend time together, and their connection deepened. They went to concerts, explored local parks, and even tried cooking new recipes together on Sunday afternoons. Max had never been much of a cook, but Sophie's easygoing nature made it fun. They laughed at the mistakes they made and celebrated the small victories of creating something edible. Max also started feeling more at home in Austin. The city's relaxed, yet vibrant atmosphere suited him perfectly. He spent weekends exploring the eclectic neighborhoods, discovering hidden gems, and getting to know the city better. He'd realized that he wasn't just rebuilding his career or trying to forget the past. He was rebuilding himself, learning to be independent, to embrace the uncertainty, and to take life one step at a time. But as his new life began to take shape, a part of him still struggled with the remnants of his past. He had buried the pain of the betrayal, buried the anger that had once consumed him, but it hadn't fully gone away. Sometimes, late at night, he'd find himself replaying the moments of his relationship with Emily, wondering where things had gone wrong, questioning what he could have done differently. It wasn't an obsession. It was more like a ghost that occasionally reappeared, reminding him of the life he'd once had. But with each passing day, he found that the ghost faded a little more. His time with Sophie helped. It wasn't that she was a replacement for Emily, far from it, but she gave him something he hadn't realized he needed. A fresh start. A chance to trust again. One afternoon, Sophie invited Max to meet her at a local art gallery that was showcasing new work by a young, up-and-coming artist. Max wasn't particularly interested in art, but Sophie had always been keen on exploring new things, and he found himself enjoying the experience more than he expected. As they wandered through the gallery, Max's thoughts wandered back to his life in New York. The job he'd left behind, the friends he'd once had, and of course Emily. He hadn't thought much about her lately, but as he looked at the abstract paintings in front of him, he was reminded of the emotions he had left behind. The pain of betrayal, the anger, and the quiet resignation that came with knowing that he would never get the answers he needed from Emily. Sophie noticed the shift in his mood and walked over to him. "Hey," she said gently. "Are you okay?" Max looked at her, her concerned expression softening the edges of his thoughts. "Yeah," he said with a small smile. "Just thinking, I guess. About how much has changed. About how much I've changed." "You've come a long way," Sophie said, taking his hand in hers. "You're not who you were when we first met, Max, and that's a good thing." Max squeezed her hand. It was simple, but it was everything he needed to hear. He wasn't the man who had been betrayed. He wasn't the man who had been consumed by grief. He was someone new, someone who was learning to live again. And maybe, just maybe, he was ready for whatever came next. Max woke up early on Saturday morning, his mind already racing with thoughts about the future. The past few months had been filled with small victories, new projects at work, a growing relationship with Sophie, and a renewed sense of independence. But as he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that he was still haunted by his past. No matter how hard he tried to move forward, there was always something pulling him back. Sophie had been a light in his life, someone who made him feel seen and understood. They had shared countless moments of laughter, quiet conversations, and simple joys. But even with all that, Max couldn't fully let go of Emily. She was no longer part of his life, but the memories of their time together lingered like an open wound. Only it wasn't as raw anymore. It had become a dull ache that he could ignore during the day, but at night, when everything was quiet, it would resurface. Max had been avoiding the real conversation he needed to have with himself. Was he ready to let go of Emily for good? Could he build a future with Sophie? Or was he still living in the shadows of his former relationship? The day Sophie invited him to the local park for a walk, Max agreed without hesitation. She had suggested they spend the afternoon together, away from the usual distractions, and Max was looking forward to the quiet, to the chance to clear his mind. They walked along a winding path that led to a small lake, surrounded by trees with their leaves beginning to change color as fall approached. The weather was crisp but pleasant, and the park was quiet, with only a few people scattered around. They found a bench by the water and sat down, the calmness of the scene soothing Max's racing thoughts. Sophie, ever perceptive, noticed the quiet tension in his demeanor. "Max, you've been quieter than usual lately. Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice soft but concerned. Max hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to put his feelings into words. He had grown close to Sophie, but he still wasn't sure how to navigate the complicated feelings he had about his past. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, his voice low. "About my past. About everything that happened with Emily." Sophie nodded, not interrupting him. She had always been a good listener, someone who didn't judge, and that's why Max felt comfortable opening up to her. "It's hard," he continued, looking out at the water, "because I'm not sure if I'm ready to leave it behind. I keep thinking about all the things that went wrong, about how I didn't see it coming. It's like I moved here to escape all that, but no matter how much I try to move on, I can't seem to shake it off completely." Sophie was quiet for a few moments, giving him the space to talk. Then she spoke gently, but with a wisdom that made Max pause. "Max, it's normal to feel conflicted. You don't just forget someone you spent years with, but holding on to the pain won't change anything. I think you're afraid of what happens if you let go of her. If you completely let go of that relationship, it feels like you're losing a part of yourself. But the truth is, letting go doesn't mean forgetting, it means accepting. And that's how you heal." Max felt the weight of her words, their simplicity cutting through the complex emotions he had been carrying. He had been afraid to fully let go, afraid that he would lose the person he had been with Emily. But Sophie was right, letting go wasn't about erasing the past. It was about accepting it and making space for the future. For something new. "I've been so focused on moving forward, Sophie," Max said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know if I've truly dealt with the hurt. Maybe I've been running from it instead of facing it head-on." Sophie reached over, placing her hand on his. "It's okay to admit that you're still healing. You don't have to have everything figured out, but you do have to decide if you're going to keep looking back or if you're going to face forward. You're stronger than you think, Max. You've been through a lot. And it's okay to take the time you need, but don't let it define you forever." Max sat in silence for a while, reflecting on Sophie's words. He had been running from his past, from the pain, from the betrayal. But what if he didn't need to run anymore? What if the key to healing was to stop running and face the hurt head-on? He wasn't sure, but he knew one thing. He couldn't keep carrying this weight with him forever. Over the next few days, Max decided to take Sophie's advice to heart. He took some time off from work, needing a mental break to gather his thoughts. He spent his days walking around Austin, visiting places that brought him peace parks, quiet cafes, and sometimes just sitting by the water, letting his mind wander. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that part of him was still stuck. He needed to confront his past, to truly forgive himself for not seeing the signs, for letting Emily in when she had already made her decision. It wasn't about Harriet, it was about him. He needed to stop holding on to the anger and hurt that had been clouding his judgment. One evening, as the sun began to set, Max sat at the edge of Lady Bird Lake, his feet dangling just above the water. He pulled out his phone and, without really thinking about it, typed a message to Emily. The decision to reach out had been impulsive, but Max felt like it was time to close that chapter, once and for all. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realized that I can't keep holding on to the past. I've forgiven you, not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to move on. I hope you find peace, and I hope we both find what we're looking for. He stared at the screen for a moment, his thumb hovering over the send button. He didn't need closure from Emily to heal, but he did need to acknowledge what had happened. He hit send, then sat back, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The next few days felt different. Lighter, almost. Max didn't expect a response from Emily, nor did he need one. He had sent the message for himself, not for her. He had faced the past and let it go, and with that release came a new sense of freedom. He wasn't running anymore. He was living. Sophie noticed the change in him when they met later that week. He seemed more relaxed, less burdened. "You okay?" she asked, her voice full of concern. "I'm better," Max said, smiling for the first time in weeks. "I'm finally letting go of the past, and I think I'm ready for what comes next." Sophie smiled back, her eyes filled with warmth. "I'm proud of you, Max." Max realized, in that moment, that he had taken the most important step on his journey to healing. He had let go. And now, for the first time in a long time, he could embrace the future with open arms. The morning light filtered through the blinds of Max's new apartment, casting soft shadows on the floor. He had grown accustomed to the new rhythm of his life in Austin. It wasn't just the city he was learning to live in, it was a new version of himself. The past few months had been filled with quiet victories. He had faced his pain, made peace with it, and started to embrace a future he once thought was impossible. But even as Max settled into his new life, he knew that healing wasn't a destination. It wasn't about arriving at a perfect version of himself. It was a journey, a process that had no clear end. Every day, he was learning more about himself, about what he wanted, and about what he was capable of. Sophie had been a key part of that process, someone who offered a new perspective on life and love. Yet, even in the calmness of his current life, there was still a gnawing feeling deep inside him. It was the feeling that he was on the verge of something new, but was he truly ready for it? Max had thrown himself into his work, dedicating long hours to his role at the tech startup. The project he was overseeing had grown into something much larger than he initially expected, and the excitement of pushing boundaries with his team was contagious. Every morning he woke up with a sense of purpose, and every evening he could feel the satisfaction of progress. Yet, as his responsibilities grew, so did the pressure. The deadlines were becoming tighter, and the expectations were higher. Max had always thrived under pressure, but now, with everything on the line, he found himself second-guessing his ability to keep up. He couldn't shake the feeling that the new role he had stepped into was more than just a job, it was an opportunity to prove himself, not only to his colleagues but to the world, and perhaps, most importantly, to himself. One Monday morning, as Max sat in a meeting with his team, he felt the weight of that pressure more than ever. The project was behind schedule, and there was still a mountain of work to get through. His team members were looking to him for direction, and although Max had always been a confident leader, doubt crept in. He had always been able to handle adversity, but this time he wasn't so sure. He tried to push through, but the exhaustion was starting to show. Every decision felt like a bigger risk. Every project detail a small mistake waiting to happen. Max had always prided himself on being able to handle pressure, but now it was wearing him thin. As the days dragged on, Max found himself retreating into his own thoughts more and more. At night, he would lie awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about his future, about everything that was riding on this project, about whether he was truly capable of seeing it through. The emotional exhaustion was more draining than the physical. Sophie noticed the change in him, but as always, she approached him with patience. On one of their usual weekend hikes, Sophie asked him directly, "Max, you've been distant lately. What's going on? You don't seem like yourself." Max paused, taking a deep breath as they walked through the wooded trail. The sun filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the path. He could feel the weight of her question, the unspoken concern behind it. "I'm not sure," Max admitted. "I guess I've just been feeling overwhelmed. The project is a lot bigger than I thought it would be, and I don't know. I'm starting to wonder if I'm even cut out for it." Sophie stopped walking and turned to face him. "Max, I know you. You've always been someone who thrives under pressure. But I can see that something's off. You're not just tired. You're second-guessing yourself." Max nodded, feeling the truth of her words hit him hard. "I guess I am. I've been so focused on proving to everyone that I can handle this. But I'm starting to realize that I'm just trying to prove it to myself. I'm not sure I even know what I'm doing anymore." Sophie placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch gentle but firm. "You don't have to have all the answers, Max. Nobody does. You're doing great. But you need to stop being so hard on yourself. You've been through a lot, and you're still healing. You don't have to carry the weight of the world alone. Let people help you." Max stood still for a moment, absorbing her words. He had always prided himself on being independent, on handling things alone. But maybe, just maybe, Sophie was right. Maybe it was okay to lean on others. Maybe it was okay to admit that he didn't have everything figured out. The next day, Max took Sophie's advice to heart. He scheduled a meeting with his team, something he hadn't done in weeks. He needed to address the issues they were facing head-on, not try to solve everything by himself. It was time to share the load, to trust in the people around him. When he walked into the meeting, he felt a sense of clarity. He knew that he couldn't keep everything bottled up inside. He needed to be honest, not just with his team, but with himself. "I'm going to be real with you all," Max began, looking around the room. "I've been under a lot of pressure lately, and it's been hard for me to keep up. But I know that I'm not in this alone. We're a team, and we need to tackle this together. If we want to get this project back on track, we all have to be on the same page. And that starts with me." The room was silent for a moment, but then one of his colleagues, Sarah, spoke up. "Max, we've got your back. We all have our areas of expertise, and we'll figure this out together." Max felt a weight lift from his shoulders. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to trust in others. He wasn't alone in this. Over the next few weeks, Max found that sharing the responsibility made a huge difference. The project began to pick up speed, and the team worked together to meet the deadline. Max still felt the pressure, but it wasn't as suffocating anymore. He had learned to delegate, to rely on the strengths of his team, and in doing so, he had regained his confidence. It wasn't just work that was improving. His relationship with Sophie deepened as well. They continued to spend their weekends hiking, cooking, and enjoying simple moments together. Max realized that Sophie was more than just a distraction from his past. She was someone who brought out the best in him. She wasn't trying to fix him, but rather, she was helping him heal in the most natural way possible. One evening, as they were sitting on the porch of Sophie's apartment, watching the stars, Max turned to her and spoke the words he had been thinking for a while. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about leaning on others. And I realized something. I've spent so much time trying to do everything on my own, trying to prove that I can handle everything. But I've got to stop pretending that I don't need help, and I don't want to do this alone anymore. Sophie looked at him, her eyes soft but filled with understanding. You don't have to do it alone, Max. Not anymore. I'm here. Max smiled. The first genuine smile he'd had in a long time. For the first time, he truly felt like he was moving forward, not just in his work, but in his life. He had made peace with his past, learned to trust others, and was finally letting go of the weight he had been carrying. Max had always been someone who thrived in control, whether it was the projects he managed at work or the life he had tried to build in Austin. But sometimes, life had a way of throwing curveballs that could change everything in an instant. And in the weeks that followed his decision to lean on others, Max found himself confronted with a new challenge that would test him in ways he hadn't expected. It all started one rainy Thursday afternoon when Max received a call from his boss, Peter, at Favoritism Solutions. Max's heart skipped a beat. Had been with the company for over a year now, but he never liked getting calls from Peter outside of regular business hours. It usually meant something big. Max, I need to talk to you, Peter said, his tone urgent but not panicked. We've had a shift in our development team. The head of our new project has suddenly taken a leave of absence, and I need someone to step in and lead. Max's mind raced. He had been with the company long enough to know what this meant. Taking on such a high-profile project was a huge responsibility. It was the kind of opportunity that people worked their entire careers for, but it also came with risks. Max wasn't sure he was ready for it. He had just started finding a balance in his life, his work, his personal growth, and his new relationship with Sophie. Could he handle taking on more, without losing control again? I understand, Max said, trying to keep his voice steady. But I've only recently taken on leadership in the current project. I'm not sure. I know, Peter interrupted. But you're the best person for this. You've handled your current team brilliantly, and I believe you have the vision and skills to lead this one. This project is important. It's about expanding our AI capabilities, and it could redefine the future of our company. Max could hear the weight of the words in Peter's voice. He wasn't just offering an opportunity. He was offering Max the chance to shape the future of the company. It was everything Max had wanted when he first moved to Austin. A chance to prove himself, to make a real difference. But now, the responsibility felt heavier than he had anticipated. You're asking me to lead this from the ground up, Peter? Max asked, his mind still processing the implications. Yes. Peter replied firmly. The team's already in place. You just need to step in and start steering the ship. I need to know by the end of the day. Max was silent for a moment, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on him. He had been looking for something to propel him forward, to push him out of his comfort zone, and this was it. The opportunity was right in front of him. But the question remained. Was he ready? I'll do it, Max finally said, his voice steady. I'll take the lead. As soon as he hung up the phone, Max felt a rush of adrenaline and anxiety hit him simultaneously. He was excited. This was a huge opportunity, but it also meant that he would have to sacrifice some of the balance he had worked so hard to find. He would need to dive into the project head first, work longer hours, and give it his all. The pressure was going to be immense. Max spent the next few days immersing himself in the details of the new project. His team at Favoritism had already laid the groundwork, but there was a lot of work to be done before they could move forward. The new project wasn't just about improving technology, it was about innovation. They were working on developing a new artificial intelligence system that would change the way people interacted with digital assistants. It was both thrilling and terrifying. Max had always considered himself a capable leader, but leading this kind of project would require something different. It wasn't just technical expertise, it was vision, creativity, and the ability to inspire his team to push boundaries. It was something Max wasn't sure he could deliver, but he was determined to try. One evening, after a particularly long day at the office, Max met up with Sophie at a cozy restaurant they frequented. He had been distant lately, consumed by the enormity of his new responsibilities. Sophie had noticed the change in him, and she wasn't going to let him avoid the conversation. "I can see you're overwhelmed," Sophie said, her voice gentle but firm. "What's going on, Max?" Max sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I've been given the biggest project of my career, Sophie. I'm leading the team to develop a new AI system, and I feel like I'm in over my head." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "Why? You've led a team before, right?" "I have," Max replied. "But this is different. It's a game changer for the company. It's not just about meeting deadlines anymore. It's about shaping the future. And I'm not sure I'm ready for that. I've never had this much responsibility before. What if I fail? What if I let my team down?" Sophie's expression softened as she reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "Max, you've been through so much already. You've proven yourself time and time again. And you're not in this alone. You've got your team, you've got me, and you've got yourself. You've already shown you can adapt and learn. You just have to believe in yourself." Max looked at her, grateful for the unwavering support she always offered. Sophie didn't just see the leaders, she saw the person beneath it all. And that meant the world to him. "Thanks," Max said quietly. "I needed to hear that." Sophie smiled. "You've got this, Max. I know you do." The next few weeks were a whirlwind for Max. He dove into the project, working late nights and spending every free moment with his team, brainstorming ideas and solving problems. He leaned heavily on his team's expertise, and in turn, he gained a deeper respect for their abilities. They all had something unique to contribute, and Max realized that he wasn't alone in this. Despite the pressure, Max began to see the project take shape. His initial self-doubt began to fade as he saw the results of their hard work. His team was cohesive, their vision aligned, and for the first time in a while, Max felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. But the pressure didn't subside. The stakes were higher than ever, and Max's exhaustion began to take its toll. He had taken on more than he ever had before, and although the project was progressing, Max couldn't shake the feeling that something had to give. He couldn't keep working at this pace without consequences. One evening, after a long day at the office, Max sat on his balcony, staring at the city lights. The constant hum of the city had become a comforting sound, but tonight it felt distant. His mind was racing, caught between the pressure of the project and the weight of his own expectations. He had done everything. Wright had stepped up, embraced the challenge, and led his team. But now, he was wondering if he had sacrificed too much in the process. Sophie joined him on the balcony, her presence a calming force. She wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and sat beside him. For a while, neither of them said anything. They just sat there, letting the silence speak for them. "You've been pushing yourself too hard," Sophie finally said, her voice quiet. "You need to take a step back. You can't do this alone." Max exhaled slowly, nodding. He had known this was coming. The truth was, he didn't have all the answers. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to. "I know," Max said softly. "I just don't want to let anyone down. Not my team. Not you." "You won't," Sophie said gently. "But you've got to give yourself room to breathe. You're human, Max. You can't carry the weight of everything on your own." Max looked at Sophie, feeling a sense of clarity wash over him. Maybe this was the balance he had been searching for. Not just work and ambition, but taking care of himself, too. It wasn't about doing everything right. It was about learning when to step back, to trust others, and to take time for himself. For the first time in a long time, Max smiled. "Thank you," he said quietly. "I think I needed to hear that." Max woke up the next morning with a newfound clarity. The night before, after Sophie's words, he had been able to let go of some of the tension he'd been holding on to for weeks. He was still facing the immense pressure of leading the project at work, but for the first time in a long while, Max realized that it wasn't just about how hard he worked or how much he could carry on his own. It was about finding the right balance between pushing himself and allowing himself to lean on others. But that clarity didn't make things any easier. The pressure had only intensified since he had taken the reins on the project. Max's team was working around the clock, and despite the progress they had made, it felt like there was always more to do. Each step forward came with its own set of challenges, unexpected technical issues, delays, and the constant worry that they might miss their target deadlines. Every decision Max made had the weight of the entire project on it. That afternoon, Max sat in the conference room with his team, reviewing the latest round of results. The AI model they were developing was showing promising results, but there were still too many variables to account for. Max could see the fatigue on the faces of his team members. They had been working tirelessly, and it was starting to show. "Okay, let's run through the bugs we've encountered," Max said, his voice calm but firm. "We need to prioritize these before we can move forward." One of his senior developers, Greg, spoke up. "We've got a few performance bottlenecks in the system. It's not an easy fix, but we're getting close to isolating the problem." Max nodded. "Good. Let's focus on that first. I want this addressed by the end of the week, and I need a report every day on progress. Let's stay ahead of it." As the meeting continued, Max felt the weight of the project pressing down on him. The team was responding well, and he could see the dedication in their eyes. But despite their hard work, he knew that the pressure was getting to them. Everyone was operating at 110%, and it wasn't sustainable. It was only a matter of time before someone burned out. Max excused himself from the meeting early, his mind still racing. He knew he needed to make a change, something had to give. But what? The only thing that felt like a constant in his life was this project, and as much as he didn't want to admit it, he was starting to wonder if it was all worth the cost. The following evening, Max met Sophie for dinner at one of their favorite spots in the city. He had kept his distance from her lately, not because of anything they had done wrong, but because of the overwhelming stress that had taken over his life. Sophie was understanding, but he could see the concern in her eyes. Tonight, he wasn't sure if he was ready to talk about everything on his mind, but he knew he had to. Over a plate of fresh pasta, Sophie looked up from her meal. "You've been quieter lately," she said softly. "I know things have been stressful with the project, but I'm worried about you. You're taking on too much." Max took a deep breath, trying to push aside the guilt that welled up inside him. "I don't know how to do it differently. The project's huge, Sophie. If we don't get it right, everything we've worked for could fall apart. I can't afford to let my team down." "I know you're doing your best," Sophie said, her voice gentle but insistent. "But you can't be everything to everyone. You need to take care of yourself, too. You can't pour from an empty cup, Max." Max stared at her for a moment, the words sinking in. She was right, of course. He couldn't keep running on empty, but he didn't know how to stop. It felt like everything was dependent on Hyman, his ability to lead, to make the right decisions, and to keep pushing the team forward. And the weight of that responsibility was starting to feel crushing. "I feel like I'm on the edge," Max admitted quietly, his eyes downcast. "Like I'm one step away from losing control of everything. The project, my team, even myself." Sophie reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "You don't have to do it all alone, Max. You're not in this by yourself. Lean on the people around you. You're doing incredible things, but you need to trust others too." Max's eyes met hers, and for the first time in weeks, he let himself relax. Sophie wasn't asking him to be perfect. She wasn't expecting him to have all the answers. She was just there, offering him the space to be human. "I don't want to let anyone down," Max said softly. "You won't," Sophie replied. "But you have to stop carrying everything on your own. You've got a team that believes in you. Don't forget that." The next day, Max took a long, hard look at his current situation. The project was important, and he knew that leading it was a great opportunity, but at what cost? He had pushed himself and his team to the limit, and the results were starting to show. They were making progress, yes, but they were also close to burnout. And Max was no exception. After some thought, he called an emergency meeting with his team. When they gathered in the conference room, Max stood at the front, his expression serious but calm. He needed to make an announcement. "I've been pushing you all hard these past few weeks, and I realize now that I've been expecting too much. We're all running on empty, and that's not sustainable. I don't want to be the cause of any of you burning out. So, here's what we're going to do. I'm assigning more team members to work on this. And we're going to restructure our priorities. We will take the next 2 days off to rest, and then we'll come back fresh and refocused. I know this project is important, but our health is more important." The team looked at him, their expressions mixed with surprise and relief. Max could see that the decision wasn't just a weight lifted from him, it was a weight lifted from them too. They were working hard, and they wanted to do their best, but they needed space to breathe. "Thank you for being honest with us, Greg," one of the senior developers said. "We've all been feeling the pressure, and it's good to know that we're in this together." Max smiled, feeling the burden on his shoulders lighten just a little. "We're in this together," he repeated, nodding. "Let's finish this strong, but let's do it in a way that doesn't break us." The following 2 days were a welcome break for everyone. Max spent the time reflecting on the balance he had been striving for in his life. He had been so focused on proving himself that he had forgotten the importance of self-care, of allowing others to help, and of giving himself the space to rest. When he returned to the office, he found his team energized, ready to tackle the project with renewed focus. Max had learned a valuable lesson. Leadership wasn't about doing everything yourself, it was about trusting the people around you, giving them the support they needed, and knowing when to step back. As Max walked through the office, he felt a sense of peace that had been absent for months. The project wasn't over, and there would still be challenges ahead, but for the first time in a long time, Max felt like he could handle whatever came his way. Max had settled into a new rhythm at work. The 2-day break had done wonders for him and his team. The productivity they gained from the rest and the sense of renewed energy were palpable as they dove back into the project. The progress they made in those next few weeks was nothing short of impressive. Max felt a sense of accomplishment that had been missing for months. But just as things were looking like they were falling into place, an unexpected email arrived that would shake everything up. It came on a Thursday morning, when Max was just getting into his stride. He had just finished a productive meeting with his team, and the project was moving forward. He was feeling good about the direction they were headed in. But then, as he sat at his desk reviewing the latest code updates, his inbox pinged with a new message from the higher-ups. It was from Peter, his boss. Max clicked on the email, expecting it to be another project update, or perhaps a message of encouragement. Instead, he read the words that instantly brought everything to a halt. "Max, I regret to inform you that the company has decided to reorganize some of our teams, and unfortunately, we're pausing the AI development project indefinitely. As of today, the focus will shift to a new priority involving a client-facing product. I know this is a lot to take in, and I'm happy to talk through the details if you'd like. Let's set up a call later this afternoon." Max sat back in his chair, his mind reeling. His first instinct was to reread the email, but it was no use. The words were the same, no matter how many times he looked at them. The project he had poured his heart into, the one that had been his responsibility for months, was now on hold. And just like that, the world Max had been working so hard to build came crumbling down around him. He ran his hand through his hair, taking in a shaky breath. It was as though the universe was mocking him. He had finally found a balance. He had finally found his footing, learned how to trust his team, and understood the importance of self-care. And now, just as things were coming together, everything had been taken away from him. The betrayal of his own body, the months of exhaustion, felt like they had all been for nothing. Max stared at the screen for a few moments longer, trying to process the gravity of the situation. He had done everything right, hadn't he? He had pushed his team, yes. But he had also listened to their needs. He had learned to let go of his fear of failure, and had embraced the idea of sharing the responsibility. And now this. He had to talk to Peter. He had to figure out what was going on. That afternoon, Max joined Peter for a call, his frustration simmering beneath the surface. He kept his voice calm, but it was hard to keep the bitterness out of his tone. "Peter, I don't understand. We've been working hard for months. We've made incredible progress, and now you're telling me everything's on hold?" Max's voice cracked despite his efforts to remain composed. "I know this is disappointing, Max," Peter said, his voice tinged with sympathy. "But the business has to pivot, and sometimes that means making tough decisions. The client-facing product is a big opportunity for the company, and we need to allocate resources accordingly." "But this isn't just another project," Max replied, trying to keep the frustration in check. "This was something new. Something that could have put us ahead in the industry. This wasn't just another task we could put on the back burner. We've invested too much in it. I understand, Max. But the reality is that the company has to make strategic moves based on our immediate needs. I'm sorry it's come to this, and I know this feels like a step back. But the team you've built is talented, and you're still a crucial part of our company's success. We'll need your leadership for the new direction we're heading in." Max nodded, but inside, he was screaming. The frustration was boiling over, and the weight of the conversation hung heavy in the air. Peter went on, "We'll have more clarity soon, and we'll find the best way to redistribute your skills. But for now, I need you to focus on helping the team transition. If you need time to process this, I'll give you the space. But I need your support." Max felt like he was being asked to pivot without warning, to switch gears in a matter of hours. He had built a connection to this project, to the work they were doing, and now, it was all slipping through his fingers. He didn't know if he could just walk away from it. But that was the reality. The corporate world didn't care about what was right or wrong. It was about what the bottom line needed. "Understood," Max said, trying to mask the bitterness. "I'll do what I can." Max ended the call and leaned back in his chair, his thoughts spinning. The frustration was overwhelming, but what bothered him the most was the helplessness he felt. It wasn't just about the project. It was about everything he had poured into it, the time, the energy, the leadership, and how it could all disappear in a second. How was he supposed to pivot now? After everything he had done to get to this point, he sat in silence for a while, unsure of what to do next. His phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Sophie. "How are you holding up?" Max smiled, the warmth of her words soothing some of the tension that had been building inside him. Sophie always knew when to check in, when to give him space, and when to offer support. She was the anchor he hadn't realized he needed. He typed back quickly. "I'm hanging in there. Just got some unexpected news at work. It's a lot to take in." Sophie's response came swiftly. "I'm here for you. Whatever you need." Max didn't realize how much he needed to hear those words until now. He had been so focused on the project, on proving himself, that he had forgotten the importance of those small but powerful connections, the ones that kept him grounded. That evening, as Max sat on his balcony once again, he found himself reflecting on the turn of events. The project was no longer his responsibility, but it didn't define him. His work didn't define him. Sophie was right. He couldn't let the pressure of his job become everything. He had spent so many months fixating on external success that he had neglected what really mattered. The people around him. His health. His happiness. He didn't have all the answers, and he didn't know what was going to come next. But he did know one thing. He couldn't go back to the way he was before. This was a chance for him to truly start again, not just at work, but in every aspect of his life. The next day, Max called Peter to let him know he was ready to help with the transition. But he also made a promise to himself. He would take this setback as a lesson. He would move forward, learn from the experience, and continue to grow not just professionally, but personally. Max had spent the past few days adjusting to the news, trying to figure out what the new direction at work meant for him and his team. The AI project was paused, but that didn't mean he was out of work. Far from it. The new client-facing project they were shifting towards was critical for favoritism solutions, and the company needed someone with a strategic mindset to help guide the team through this change. Peter had made it clear that Max was still a key player, but that didn't ease the unease that had settled deep in Max's gut. The AI project had been a passion for him, a challenge that excited him every day. Now he was being asked to focus on something completely different. He had worked hard to assemble a team that could bring the AI project to life, but now they were being redirected to work on something new. Would they remain as motivated? Would he? The first meeting with his team about the new project was scheduled for the following Monday. Max was already feeling the pressure of leading them in a new direction, especially when the original goal seemed so close. But he had a duty to make this work. He knew how critical this project was, and he was determined not to let it be another failure. On Monday morning, Max stood at the front of the conference room, his team seated before him, their expressions a mix of curiosity and uncertainty. They had been as blindsided by the pivot as Max had been, but now, it was time to get them on board, to shift their focus and energy. "All right, team," Max began, his voice calm but firm. "I know this isn't what we expected. We've been working for months on the AI project, and now we're taking on a new direction. We've been asked to develop a new client-facing product that could be a game-changer for the company." The room was quiet. Max could feel the weight of their disappointment, their exhaustion from the months of work that had suddenly been thrown into limbo. "We're still going to be utilizing the knowledge we gained from the AI project," Max continued. "But this will require a new mindset. The client wants a product that is scalable and user-friendly, and we have to deliver that. It's going to be a challenge, but I believe in each of you, and we're going to work together to make this happen." The team nodded, but Max could sense the hesitation. This wasn't the project they had been excited about. It was a complete shift. But what choice did they have? They had to make it work. There was no going back. "Here's the plan," Max said, setting a series of new goals and timelines. "We're going to break into smaller teams and start prototyping the initial concepts. We'll focus on the user interface, ensuring it's intuitive, and we'll work with the development team to make sure it's scalable. We're going to take what we've learned from the AI project and use it to our advantage." He paused for a moment, making eye contact with his team members. "I know this is hard, but we're going to make it through. We've got the skills and we've got the drive. Let's prove that we can adapt to anything. We've done it before." The team nodded, but Max could see the uncertainty in their eyes. He was feeling it too. They were all standing at the edge of something new, something that was uncharted. But there was no turning back now. The next few weeks were a blur of brainstorming sessions, intense meetings, and long hours. Max had learned to trust his team's expertise, but the pressure of shifting gears so quickly started to take its toll. The new product wasn't coming together as quickly as he had hoped. There were bugs to work through, design problems to solve, and it felt like every step forward was followed by 2 steps back. Max was doing his best to keep the team motivated, but he was starting to feel the strain himself. The frustration and stress that had been building up over the past few weeks were weighing on him more than he liked to admit. He found himself working late every night, missing dinners with Sophie, and barely having time to step back and breathe. But he kept pushing. He had to. It was during one of these late nights, as Max sat hunched over his desk in the dim glow of his computer screen, that Sophie called. Her voice was soothing, but there was a hint of concern. "Max, I can hear it in your voice. What's going on? Are you okay?" Max ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "I'm fine. Just busy. There's a lot of work to do. I've got a team relying on me, and I'm not letting them down." Sophie's voice softened. "I get it. But you've been working nonstop for weeks. You need a break, Max. You can't keep going like this." Max wanted to tell her he was fine, that he could handle it, but deep down he knew she was right. He was pushing himself too hard, and it wasn't just affecting his work. It was affecting his personal life too. Sophie hadn't seen him at his best in weeks, and he hated that. He hated feeling like he was failing in his relationship with her, just like he was starting to feel like he was failing at work. "I know," Max said quietly. "I just don't know how to stop. Everything feels like it's on the line." Sophie paused for a moment before replying, her voice gentle but firm. "Max, you don't have to do it all alone. You can lean on me, you know. You don't have to be perfect all the time. And you don't have to be everything for everyone." Max felt the weight of her words, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to relax. He had been so focused on proving himself at work, in his relationships, that he had forgotten to give himself grace. He didn't have to be perfect. He just had to be willing to show up, to try, and to lean on the people who cared about him. The next day, Max decided to take Sophie's advice. He couldn't keep carrying everything on his shoulders, especially when he had people who were willing to help him. He went into the office, but this time, he wasn't going to carry the burden alone. He called his team together and had an open discussion. They were all feeling the pressure, and it was time to address it head on. "I've been pushing us all really hard," Max admitted, standing in front of his team. "I realize now that I haven't been taking care of myself, and I haven't been fully present for all of you. That stops today. We're going to reevaluate our priorities, delegate more, and set more realistic goals. No more late nights. No more burning out." His team was quiet at first, but then Greg spoke up. "We're all in this together, Max. And we appreciate you stepping up. We've got your back." Max smiled, a weight lifting off his shoulders. It wasn't going to be easy, but this was the kind of leadership he wanted to practice. One that acknowledged the strain, that admitted imperfection, and that relied on others to carry the load. In the days that followed, things began to change. The pressure was still there, but Max felt a renewed sense of clarity. By leaning on his team and trusting in their abilities, he was able to take a step back and focus on the bigger picture. The client-facing product wasn't just another project, it was an opportunity for his team to shine, and they were ready. Max continued to work alongside his team, but he also made time for himself. He began spending more time with Sophie again, enjoying quiet dinners and walks in the park. He realized that the work was important, but so was his personal life. And the key to balancing both was learning to ask for help when he needed it. As the weeks passed, the project began to take shape. They hit the ground running, and though there were still challenges, Max felt confident that they would meet the deadline. He wasn't doing it alone, and that, he realized, was the most important part. Max had never been one to shy away from challenges. In fact, the more difficult something seemed, the more determined he became. But as the days wore on, he began to realize that even his limitless drive had its limits. The project was progressing. Yes. But the hurdles seemed never-ending. There were constant revisions, new client demands, unexpected technical issues, and deadlines that seemed to multiply overnight. Each challenge was met with determination, but it was clear that something was beginning to give. One particularly late evening, Max sat alone in the office, staring at his screen. The usual hum of the office had long since quieted, and the silence seemed deafening. His team had all left for the day, and he had stayed behind to try to fix a bug that had cropped up at the last minute. It wasn't just any bug, it was a critical one, threatening to derail the product's launch. Max could feel the weight of it pressing down on him. He rubbed his eyes, feeling the exhaustion settle into his bones. He hadn't been sleeping well for the past few weeks. Every night he lay awake thinking about the project, worrying about the people depending on him, wondering if he was doing enough. It wasn't just the technical challenges anymore. It was the emotional and mental toll that the project had taken on him. He had been working non-stop for weeks, pushing himself and his team harder than ever before, and now the pressure was mounting in ways he couldn't ignore. Max ran his hands through his hair, letting out a frustrated sigh. He had told himself he could handle it all. He had promised Sophie that he wouldn't let the project consume him. but that promise seemed like a distant memory now. His life had become a blur of meetings, late nights, and moments of doubt. His relationship with Sophie had taken a back seat, and even his physical health was starting to show the signs of burnout. Max's phone buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Sophie. "I'm worried about you. I haven't seen you in days. How are you holding up?" Max stared at the message for a moment, feeling a pang of guilt. Sophie had been patient with him, supportive even when he had shut her out. But he couldn't keep doing this. He couldn't keep pushing her away. He quickly typed a response, his fingers hovering over the keys as he tried to express everything that had been building up inside him. "I'm fine. Just a lot going on with the project. I'll make time for us soon. Promise." He hit send and sat back in his chair, feeling the weight of his words. He wasn't fine, and Sophie deserved to know the truth. He had been avoiding her, avoiding everything that reminded him of his life outside of work. He had been so consumed with this project that he had forgotten to live. The balance he had fought so hard to maintain had slipped away, and now everything was falling apart. The next morning, Max woke up to a storm of messages from his team. They had encountered more problems with the product, and a key feature wasn't functioning as expected. As he read through the messages, his stomach dropped. They were running out of time. The launch date was fast approaching, and it seemed like the product still wasn't ready. He quickly called an emergency meeting with his team, feeling a rush of anxiety course through him. They had to fix this, and they had to do it fast. The weight of the responsibility pressed on him like a heavy stone. "I know we're behind," Max said, standing in front of his team. "But we can't afford to delay this launch. We need to find a solution, and we need to do it together. We've come this far, and we're not stopping now." The team nodded, but Max could see the exhaustion in their eyes. They had been working tirelessly for weeks, and now they were all running on empty. Even Greg, who had been one of the most reliable members of the team, was looking worn out. "We'll fix it," Greg said, his voice steady but tired. "We've got this. But we need to make sure we're prioritizing the right things. Let's not rush through this." Max knew Greg was right. They couldn't afford to sacrifice quality for speed. But there was no time to waste. The clock was ticking, and every minute felt like it was slipping away. Later that evening, as Max sat at his desk, he received another message from Sophie. "Max, we need to talk. I'm worried. You've been distant lately, and I can see that you're struggling. I want to be there for you, but I need you to let me in." Max felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't realized how much he had been pushing Sophie away until now. She was the one constant in his life, the one person who had always been there for him, and yet he had kept her at arm's length, afraid of burdening her with his stress, his fears, his exhaustion. He picked up the phone and called her. "Sophie," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'm so sorry. I've been drowning in this project. I thought I could handle it, but I've lost control. I've been so focused on work that I forgot about everything else. I forgot about you, and I don't want to keep doing this." Sophie's voice came through the phone, calm and understanding. "Max, I know you're under pressure. I can see it. But you don't have to carry this alone. You're allowed to need help, and you're allowed to take a step back when it gets too much. I'm here for you." Max closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. Sophie's words were exactly what he needed to hear. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to feel vulnerable. The weight of the project, the fear of failure, had been clouding his judgment, and it had affected everything: his work, his relationship, his well-being. But maybe it was time to stop pretending he had it all figured out. "I can't keep doing this," he said quietly. "I need to step back. I need to take care of myself, and I need to take care of us. I don't want to keep sacrificing everything for a project that might fail anyway." Sophie's voice softened. "Max, you don't have to sacrifice yourself for anything. We'll figure it out. You'll figure it out. But you need to let yourself breathe first." Max sat in silence after the call ended, the weight in his chest easing slightly. He had made the decision he was going to step back. He wasn't going to sacrifice his health, his happiness, or his relationships just to meet a deadline. The project was important, but it wasn't everything. The next day, Max called Peter to explain his decision. He told him that he needed to take a break, that he couldn't keep up with the pace they had set. To his surprise, Peter was understanding, even if the decision would mean a delay in the project. "Max, I understand. You've been carrying a lot, and it's been showing. We'll work out a plan to redistribute some of the work, but I want you to take the time you need. Get some rest. Reassess. We'll be here when you're ready." Max hung up the phone, feeling a strange mix of relief and apprehension. It wasn't easy to admit that he couldn't do it all, but it was the first step toward finding balance again. As Max took a break from work, he spent more time with Sophie, reconnecting with the parts of himself he had neglected for so long. He went for long walks, spent evenings cooking together, and took the time to just breathe. The pressure of the project hadn't gone away, but the weight of it had lessened. For the first time in weeks, Max felt like he was living again, not just surviving. He knew there would be challenges ahead. The project wasn't over, and there would still be deadlines to meet. But for the first time, he understood that success wasn't just about the work. It was about finding peace with himself and his place in the world. Max had made a tough decision, one that he knew would alter the course of his career, but it was one that had been necessary for his well-being. Stepping back from the pressure of the project at Favoritism Solutions had been an act of self-care. It was strange at first to let go of the tight grip he had held on his work life. It felt like giving up at moments, but with each passing day, Max realized how much he had been missing out on. The weight that had been crushing him had finally begun to lift, and the fog that clouded his mind was clearing. Sophie had been there for him through it all, offering comfort and advice when he needed it most. She had understood the pressure he had been under, and now, she was encouraging him to take time for himself. He had spent weeks worrying about his career, but Sophie reminded him that there was more to life than work. Over the next couple of weeks, Max allowed himself to rest, recharge, and reassess his priorities. He stopped checking emails at night, took walks in the city, and made time for the things that had been neglected for so long. For the first time in months, he was able to really see the world around him, to appreciate the small moments that had slipped by unnoticed. Max spent more time with Sophie, rediscovering the joy of simple, undistracted moments. They took a weekend trip to the Texas Hill Country, exploring quaint towns, eating at small family-owned diners, and watching sunsets over rolling hills. It was during this trip that Max realized just how much he had missed out on in the last year, how his relentless drive to succeed had taken him away from the things that truly mattered. Sophie's presence reminded him of the importance of connection not just with his work but with the people who truly cared about him. As the weeks passed, Max felt his confidence slowly return. He began to see the bigger picture, realizing that the project and the company were just one part of his life. Yes, he cared about them deeply, but they didn't define him. His career wasn't the only thing that gave him purpose. Relationships, his health, and his happiness did too. It was a revelation that he had needed for a long time. One afternoon, Max received a call from Peter. He hadn't spoken to him in a few weeks, and the sound of Peter's voice immediately brought back the anxiety that Max had felt so often before. "Max," Peter began, his tone warm. "I wanted to check in and see how you're doing. We've been working on redistributing the workload, but I know that you've needed some time to reset. How are you feeling?" Max hesitated, unsure of how to explain everything he had been processing. "I'm doing much better, Peter. I've been taking some time off to focus on myself, and it's been really helpful. I've had time to think about my priorities and my role here." Peter was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad to hear you're doing better. But Max, I also want to say that we've been impressed with how you've handled everything. We value your leadership and your contributions to the company, but I understand that you need to decide what's next for you. We're still working through the changes with the client-facing project, and I'd love to have you back on board in a more manageable capacity. But the decision is up to you." Max felt a surge of mixed emotions. He had always imagined himself rising through the ranks at Fiverton, taking on more responsibilities and leading larger projects. But now, after everything, he wasn't sure he wanted that anymore. He had been so focused on climbing the corporate ladder that he had lost sight of what truly mattered to him. Could he continue with Fiverton, or was it time for a change? "I appreciate that, Peter," Max said slowly. "And I do care about the company, but I've realized that I need to find more balance in my life. I can't keep going at this pace. I want to be involved, but I need a role that allows me to focus on the things that matter outside of work." Peter was quiet for a moment, processing Max's words. "I respect that, Max. We all need to find balance. I'll support whatever decision you make, but know that we value you here. And if you decide to stay, we'll find a way to make it work." Max exhaled slowly, feeling a sense of relief. For the first time in a long time, he was making a decision based on his own needs, not just the expectations of others. "Thank you, Peter. I'll take some time to think it through, but I appreciate your understanding." That evening, Max sat on the balcony of his apartment, gazing out at the city skyline. The sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and for the first time in a long while, Max felt truly at peace. The tension in his shoulders had dissolved, and the racing thoughts in his mind had quieted. Sophie joined him outside, handing him a cup of coffee. "What are you thinking?" she asked, settling next to him. Max took a deep breath, enjoying the warmth of the coffee in his hands. "I think I'm finally figuring out what I need," he said quietly. "I've been so focused on success, on proving myself, that I forgot what I really wanted. It's not about climbing the corporate ladder or working nonstop. It's about finding a role that lets me have balance, where I can grow without losing myself." Sophie smiled, her eyes soft with understanding. "That sounds like exactly what you need. You don't have to sacrifice your happiness for your career, Max. You can have both." Max nodded, feeling the weight of the decision that still loomed in front of him. But for the first time, he felt confident in his ability to make it. He wasn't afraid of the unknown anymore. He had learned that his worth wasn't tied to his job or his success at work. It was tied to the person he had become, the relationships he had built, and the life he was living. The next day, Max went to the office with a renewed sense of purpose. He met with Peter to discuss his future with the company. He told him that he was willing to return, but he needed a role that was more in line with his newfound priorities, something with less pressure and more flexibility. Peter was supportive, agreeing to find a position that would allow Max to focus on both his professional growth and his personal well-being. Max left the meeting with a sense of clarity. He had set the boundaries he needed, and he was confident in the decision he had made. It wasn't just about the next project or the next promotion. It was about creating a life where he didn't have to sacrifice his happiness for success. As he walked back to his apartment, he felt a sense of freedom he hadn't known in months. He had taken control of his future. And now, he was ready for whatever came next. The journey ahead wasn't clear, but he knew one thing for sure: it would be on his terms.